Okay, we're going to attack 2 chapters of Acts tonight. Oh.
That's serious stuff.
Yeah, well, I didn't see too much commentary or stuff on this, so I just thought we'll get into the pure word itself, and then we'll talk a bit about Israel and Israel at the end. So let's dive into it. We're up to Acts 21 and 22. We continue in the book of Acts, which is our necessary primer to give us the context and background for understanding everything that comes in the new blood covenant scriptures following the Gospels. Got that? If we want to understand everything that was written after the Gospels, we got to know what they went through. And we're seeing what they went through in the book of Acts. We see their encounters, so we know why they wrote what they wrote. After nearly 20 years, Acts 21 brings Paul back from travelling the Aegean Sea region to Jerusalem for 2 purposes. First, to obey the Torah commandment that he participates in the pilgrimage festival of Pentecost, which he was trying to do. This was a crossover, remember, from Old to New. They were trying to keep the Jewish stuff as much as they could, as well as receive all the new stuff that Yahushua was giving them. But they were Jewish people, so they were ingrained in those traditions. Second, he was delivering money that he had collected from the various fellowships he visited. The money was for 2 different purposes. 1, charity for poor believers in Jerusalem, and 2, the half shekel temple tax that every Jew, no matter where they lived, was to contribute annually for the operational expenses of the temple. What about that? This sham of a temple that's in Jerusalem, and if you were a Jew, even if you were a diaspora out in the far corners of the earth somewhere, you were expected to contribute to this blasted temple. Fake priesthood. So some of the money was given to James, the leader in Jerusalem, to be distributed, and some was given to the priests as the temple tax. Just understand that before we go into Acts 21. Luke says, after we said goodbye and tore ourselves away from them, this was the guys from the last chapter, we sailed a straight course to Kos Island. The next day we went to the island of Rhodes, and from there we went to Patara. There we found a ship that was going to the area of Phoenicia. We got on the ship and sailed away. We sailed near the island of Cyprus. We could see it on the north side, but we did not stop. This is like a travel itinerary, isn't it? It's riding as they're sailing. We sailed to the country of Syria. We stopped at Tyre because the ship needed to unload its cargo there. Remember Tyre from our Revelation studies? That was the big Babylonian style city that was the metropolis of the area. Unload its cargo. We see just how widespread the Jews were. There was hardly a place in all of the known world where you wouldn't find at least a few Jewish families. So, and with the Jewish, you could say, religion, went a belief in the Elohim of the old scriptures. So they were halfway there. They believed in only one Elohim, but Paul was going out there to tell them about who this Elohim was. He'd come in the flesh and he'd died to deliver them, set them free. We found Yahushua's followers there and stayed with them for 7 days, and they warned Paul. This was interesting. They warned Paul through the Spirit not to go to Jerusalem. But when our time there was up, we returned to the ship to continue our trip to Jerusalem. All the followers, even the women and children, came with us to the seashore. We all knelt down on the beach, prayed, embraced, and said goodbye. Then we got on the ship and the followers went home. We continued our trip from Tyre. Don't forget that bit there. They've been warned by the Spirit, not just hocus pocus. This was the Spirit, Yahushua's Spirit, had warned these believers to tell Paul, you better not go back to Jerusalem, you're in danger. He's ignoring it. Keep that in your mind. We continued our trip from Tyre and went to the city of Ptolemais. We greeted the believers there and stayed with them 1 day. The next day we left Ptolemais and went to the city of Caesarea. we went into the home of Philip and stayed with him. He had the work of telling the good news. He was one of the 7 helpers. Back a few chapters ago, 7 helpers were elected. He had 4 unmarried daughters who had the gift of prophecy, prophesying. Now, didn't include all this, but often in the Jewish belief, if you had daughters that were teenagers, older teenagers, and they were still maidens, virgins, unmarried, they were more inclined, the Jews believed, to have the gift of prophesying because they were pure. I mean, that doesn't mean anything to us because you can be a married woman and still be just as pure because, as we know, it's a different kind of purity now, it's a different kind of set apartness. But that's what's generally going on here. That's the only time we hear mention of this. Daughters who had the gift of prophesying. They don't prophesy over him though, but it's written there. After we had been there for several days, a prophet named Agabus came from Judea. He came to us and took Paul's belt. Imagine someone just coming up here and just taking your belt. He came up to us, took Paul's belt, and then used it to tie his own hands and feet together. What's this wacko doing? Then he said, Yahushua's spirit tells me this is how the Jews in Jerusalem will tie up the man who wears this belt. Then they will hand him over to the unbelieving nations, the Gentiles. So now we've got another guy who's inspired by Yahushua's spirit to go and do a visual demonstration of what Yahushua's telling him to do. Do you understand that? Ties himself up with Paul's belt. Says, see what's happening here? This is what's going to happen to you, Paul, if you keep going to Jerusalem. When we heard this, we and the other followers there begged Paul not to go to Jerusalem. He's had 2 warnings now by the Spirit. But he said, why are you weeping and trying to break my heart with your sadness? I'm willing to be put in jail in Jerusalem. I'm even ready to die for the name of my master Yahushua. We could not persuade him to stay away from Jerusalem. So we stopped begging him and said, we pray that the desire of Yahushua will be done. After this, we got ready and left for Jerusalem. Let's explore that. Is Yahushua giving contradicting words to different people?
No.
Paul has been warned twice now by people who have seen and heard glimpses of the danger he faces in Jerusalem. Yes, they are legitimate in hearing from Yahushua and genuine in their love to try and sway their brother away from troubles, as any of us would. But Paul is also being led and has faced what the end of his life will probably look like for standing up to authorities in the name of Yahushua in the way he is. And he's pretty bold and in your face the way he does it to certain groups. So he's faced what the outcome of that would be. So it's not that Yahushua's voice is giving contradicting advice to different people. It's that these people were interested in Paul's safety, while Paul was interested and focused on the work. So you can't just say, well, I heard from Yahushua not to go, and Paul says, well, I heard from Yahushua to go. Well, who's wrong? It's not about that. It's that they're... Hey?
Robert.
Oh. So yeah, it's not that they're hearing different voices. It's that their concern, as any of our concern would be, if you found out someone was going to get in big trouble going somewhere, you'd be like, oh, better not go there, mate. That's not safe. But Paul has got a unique ministry, as we've seen, like most of the 12 disciples had, from having direct exposure to Yahushua and seeing what he went through, weren't as phased. I'm not saying they wouldn't have got freaked out at times, but they weren't phased to follow in Yahushua's footsteps because they knew him. Some of the followers of Yahushua from Caesarea went with us. These followers took us to the home of Manason, a man from Cyprus, who was one of the first people to be a follower of Yahushua. They took us to his home so that we could stay with him. The brothers and sisters in Jerusalem were very happy to see us. The next day, Paul went with us to visit James. Here we go, this is James, Yahusha's brother. Very next day, Paul went with us to visit James, and all the elders were there too. These are whoever were left of the 12 disciples that were still there. Paul's going to look back up with those guys. After greeting them, Paul told them point by point all that Yahusha had used him to do among the nations. Paul had great respect for James as one of the leaders of the way in Jerusalem. James, by this stage, 25 years after the fact, had become one of the major pillars, I guess you could say, in Jerusalem. He didn't travel out much. He stayed there and dealt with the believers in Jerusalem. So Paul had great respect for him for what he was doing in Jerusalem. And as we know, Paul had been sent out to the Gentiles. So when the leaders heard this, heard what? All that Paul was saying. He's got 20 odd years of stuff that's happened in the nations to share with them. And when the leaders heard this, they all praised Yahusha, saying to Paul, "Brother, you can see that thousands of Jews have become believers and are still passionate about Yahuwah's Torah instruction. Word's been getting around that you teach the Jews who live out in the nations to ignore Moses' laws and not to circumcise their sons or follow the practices. What should we do then? These Jewish believers here will learn that you've come here, that you've come home, and there'll be a riot. So we'll tell you what to do. 4 of our men have made a vow." This was still going on in this crossover cultural situation. 4 of our men have made a vow, probably more than likely a Nazirite vow. Same thing Samson did. You had to shave your head. You couldn't drink grape juice or something like that. There's about 3 or 4 things you wanted to do for a period of time. And it was to bring you closer to your Creator, in this case Yahusha. So 4 of our men have made a vow to Yahusha. So go with these guys when they get cleansed. At the end of the vow you had to get cleansed. And pay their expenses so that they can all shave their heads. Sorry, I said it reversed. They had to grow their hair. They had to grow their hair like Samson. They weren't allowed to shave it. So at the end of it, of course, they've had enough. They go and shave their hair off, signifying, where's my mouse gone? Signifying the end of a vow where hair was to be grown. This will prove to everyone that the things they have heard about you are not true. They will see that you obey the law of Moses in your own life. Now, in regard to the non-Jewish believers, we've already sent a letter to them saying what they should do. You remember when they sent this letter? They told them not to eat food that has been offered to idols. Don't eat meat from animals that have been strangled. Don't eat meat that still has the blood in it. Don't be involved in whoring, sexual sin. Of all the things that you could put in a package to give these Gentiles who have no idea about the commandments, the covenant, they didn't hand them the 10 commandments, did they? They gave them 4 things. Does that give us an inclination of what is important? And 3 of them are about food. Of all the things you could tell them, stealing and lying and all these things, they said don't eat, mainly because of all the idolatry that was going on, was involved in temples and food. So that's why they gave him that advice. And of course, whoring, sexual sin, big no-no. So we've already told the Gentiles what to do. So you, Paul, need to get a good reputation around here and go with these Jewish guys with their cleanse. So Paul took the 4 men with him. The next day, he didn't see him arguing, going, I'm not into all this Jewish stuff anymore. No, I'm not going to degrade myself. No, he just flowed with it. He had respect for the elders that were there. He just flowed with it. Paul took the 4 men with him. The next day, he shared in their cleansing ceremony and went to the temple area, announcing that their time of separation had finished, giving an offering for each of the men with him. See, I read a lot of these things and I go, this is why a lot of believers still think that the older style instructions are still relevant today, because this is a long time after Yahusha's come and gone, and Paul's still, they're doing Nazirite vows, they're circumcising their boys, they're doing all this stuff. But as we look back 2,000 years now at the culture we're in, were we raised in a Hebrew culture? If you were raised in a Hebrew culture today and you were circumcised, you were resting on all that stuff, you wouldn't be in trouble. But it's not necessary, is it? We're raised in a mishmash English culture. It's the heart operation that matters. So Paul takes them, does all that. When the 7-day period was almost finished, because they had to cleanse for seven days before they were pure, some Jews from Asia saw Paul in the temple area. Here we go. They stirred up everyone into an angry mob. They grabbed Paul and shouted, "Men of Israel, help us! This is the man who is teaching things that are against the law of Moses, against our people and against this temple of ours. This is what he teaches people everywhere. Now he's brought some Greeks into the temple area and has made this set-apart place unclean." Because remember, the Jews and Gentiles weren't allowed to congregate together. In the way, in Yahusha's movement they could, dealt with all that, but not for the traditional Jews. The Jews said this because they had seen Trophimus with Paul in Jerusalem. And Trophimus was a man from Ephesus. So the Jews thought that Paul had taken him into the set-apart area of the temple, which was forbidden for Gentiles. An angry reaction spread throughout the city, and everyone came running to the temple. They grabbed Paul and dragged him out of the set-apart area, and the gates were closed immediately. While they were trying to kill Paul, the commander of the Roman army in Jerusalem got word that the whole city was in a state of riot. And you know how the Romans felt about the Jews and their religious riots? They couldn't stand it. They're pests, they're pains in the neck, so we can't have these riots going on. Worship whatever you want, but just shut up about it. Paul, the commander of the Roman, Immediately the commander ran to where the crowd had gathered, taking with him some army officers and soldiers. When the people saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Why? The commander went over to Paul and arrested him. He told his soldiers to tie him up with 2 chains. Then he asked, "Who's this man? What's he done wrong?" After he's arrested him, "Who's this man? What's he done wrong?" Some people there were shouting one thing and others were shouting something else. So because of all this confusion and shouting, the commander couldn't understand the truth of what was going on. So he told the soldiers to take Paul to the army building. The whole crowd was following them. And when the soldiers came to the steps, they had to carry Paul. They did this to protect him, because the people were ready to bash him and were all shouting, "Kill him, kill him." This is a huge angry mob going on, and Paul hasn't even said a word yet. This is just from reputation. Just his reputation, because they're too into their Jewish oral laws. So when the soldiers were ready to take Paul into the army building, he asked the commander, this is Paul, he asked the commander, "Can I say something to you?" The commander said, "Oh, you speak Greek. Then you are not the man I thought you were. I thought you were the Egyptian who started some trouble against the government not long ago and led 4,000 terrorists out to the desert." Doesn't even know who he's arrested. Paul says, "No, mate, I'm a Jew from Tarsus in the country of Cilicia and a Roman citizen. Please let me speak to the people." Let me speak to the people. The commander told Paul he could speak, so he stood on the steps and waved his hands so that the people would be quiet. The people became quiet, and Paul spoke to them in the Hebrew language. So Paul can speak lots of languages. Paul said, "Men, brothers, fathers, please listen to me. Let me explain." This is 22, I think. Got my numbers wrong. Paul said, "Men, brothers, fathers, please listen to me. Please let me explain myself to you." And when the Jews heard Paul speaking in Hebrew, they all shut up. I wanted to go on because they just left him at the top of the stairs here, and I didn't want to end the whole week with, what does he say? What does he say? Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger. What does he say? So we're going to find out what he says. Men and brothers, listen to me. Let me explain myself. And when the Jews heard Paul speaking in Hebrew, they all shut up. And Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus, in the country of Cilicia. I grew up in this city. I was a student of Gamaliel, who carefully taught me everything about the law of our fathers. So he's letting them know, I know all about these laws you're getting me in trouble for. I was very serious about serving Elohim, the same as all of you here today. I persecuted the people who followed the way and killed many of them. I arrested men and women and put them in jail. The high priest and the whole council of elders can tell you that this is true. One time these leaders gave me some letters for the Jewish brothers in the city of Damascus. I was going there to arrest the followers of Yahusha and bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment. But then something happened to me on my way to Damascus. It was about noon, and suddenly a bright light from heaven shone all around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? There he is there. Isn't that funny? Hey, Saul, mate, what are you doing? I asked, who are you, Master? And the voice said, I am Yahusha from Nazareth, the one you are hatefully persecuting. The men who were with me did not hear the voice, but they saw the light. I said, what shall I do, Master? And he said, get up and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that I've planned for you to do. I could not see because the bright light had made me blind. What does this tell us about Yahusha's light?
That is blinding.
Blinding. We saw what happened to Moses with the bush and on the mountain. Came back like a radiator. Look at this. Now that's just a little light to blind his eyes. What happens when he brings, as we've been studying in Revelation, what happens when he comes into this dimension with his full force? Paul couldn't even see for weeks and weeks. So I could not see because the bright light had made me blind. So the men led me into Damascus. And in Damascus, a man named Ananias came to me. He was a man who was devoted to Yahusha and obeyed the law of Moses. There it is again. It's letting these people know, not only was I raised in the law of Moses, the man who trained me in Yahusha obeyed the law of Moses. So he's defending himself. All the Jews who lived there respected him. He came to me and said, Saul, my brother, look up and see again. And immediately I was able to see him. There's another example of Ananias laying hands on Paul, the power. Ananias told me, the Elohim of our fathers chose you long ago to know his plan. I like the way that they keep saying the Elohim of our fathers, because they're showing that it's not some new funky deity that we've brought in named Yahusha. It's the Elohim of Moses. It's the same Elohim in the flesh for deliverance as we know Yahusha. So they're connecting it all the time. This isn't the new Elohim, this is the one, the creator of the universe that we've always been worshipping. Now we get to know who he is. So he chose you to see the righteous one. He chose you to see the righteous one and to hear the voice of his mouth. You will be his witness to all people. You will tell them what you have seen and heard. So the disciples couldn't very well say to Paul, you haven't seen Yahusha, could they? We walked around with him. We're his disciple. Who are you? He could say, look, I saw him too. I was blind for a month or so from the encounter. He'd seen Yahusha as well. So you will tell them what you have seen and heard. Now don't wait any longer. Get up, be immersed, and wash away your sins, trusting in Yahusha to deliver you. So that's what Ananias told him. Paul continues, later, I came back to Jerusalem. I was praying in the temple area and I saw a vision. I saw Yahusha and he said to me, hurry and leave Jerusalem now. The people here will not accept the truth you tell them about me. So Yahusha just said it. They're not going to listen to you about me. They went and killed me, so what are they going to listen to you about? I said, but Master, the people know that I am one. The people know that I was the one who put the believers in jail and beat them. I went through all the synagogues to find and arrest the people who believe in you. The people also know that I was there when Stephen, your witness, was killed. I stood there and agreed that they should kill him. I even held the coats of the men who were killing him. But Yahusha said to me, leave now. I will send you far away to the nations now. And the people didn't like that bit there, to the nations. Because he says up here, he's telling the people that Yahusha's told me, these Jews aren't going to listen to you. Take my message to the nations. And then he says, leave now to the nations. And as soon as the people stopped listening when Paul said this last bit. Didn't like that last bit. They all shouted, get rid of this man. He doesn't deserve to live. They kept on shouting, ripping off their clothes and throwing dust into the air. Then the commander told the soldiers to take Paul into the army building and beat him. He hasn't been charged with anything. He wanted to make Paul explain why the people were shouting against him like this. But the soldiers were so the soldiers were tying Paul, preparing to beat him. But he said to an army officer there, this is Paul, he says to the army officer there, do you have the right to beat a Roman citizen who has not been proven guilty? And when the officer heard this, he went to the commander and told him about it, because these are Roman soldiers that are in charge of this place, and they thought he was either a Greek or a Hebrew. So he's just announced, are you allowed to beat a Roman citizen who has not been proven guilty? When the officer heard this, he went to the commander and told him about it. The officer said, don't you know what you're doing? This man is a Roman citizen. Then the commander came to Paul and said, tell me, are you really a Roman citizen? He answered, yes. The commander said, I paid a lot of money to become a Roman citizen. But Paul said, well, I was born one, mate. What are you going to do about it? I was born one. Then the men who were preparing to question Paul moved away from him immediately. They were freaked out. Moved away from him immediately, and the commander was afraid because he had already put Paul, a Roman citizen, which was a very big deal. This was the beast system of Rome, remember? That was alive, kicking right then. This was a very big deal to be a Roman citizen. They'd put him in chains, so they could get in big trouble. The next day, the commander decided to learn why the Jews were accusing Paul. So he ordered the chief priests and the whole high council to meet together. He had Paul's chains taken off and had him brought in to face the council. So I wasn't going to go on to the next chapter, even though I wanted to know what he says to this council. That you'll have to wait till next week. All right?
Dang, literally another cliffhanger.
Another cliffhanger tonight. All right?
Live.
So it just goes from one to the other to the other. He's just being brought in front of people. First it was the people out in the courtyard. Now he's been taken to the high council. And what's he going to say to the high council? So you get an idea of Paul's chaotic life, don't you? Following Yahusha, and how people were telling him, don't go to Jerusalem because this will happen. But he goes anyway because he knows he's got a work to do.
It's like one of those movies where they flash back to the past and then come back to the present.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
It's hard to keep up sometimes, isn't it, with those ones?
It's very interesting, Paul, because one minute you're racking your brain, because one minute he's speaking Greek, next minute he's speaking Hebrew, next minute he's telling people he's a Roman. I'm like, it was much simpler reading about the fishermen, wasn't it? You knew who they were. This guy knows everything. He's got his finger in every political pot. You can see why Yahusha's taken him to the nations, because he's fluent in so many different things. I want to finish tonight just by explaining, this has come up a lot because we've been retranslating scriptures and things and what words to use. Yisrael, Israel, or the bride. Which are we? Can you see why Yahusha sent Paul to the nations to offer them the good news of deliverance? He had divorced Israel of old, his old bride, because she was a whore, and he never returned to man-made temples or institutions again. We are now his living dwellings. And that was the one point that Paul said in that whole spiel of story of how he came to Yahusha. As soon as he said, Yahusha told me, none of you guys are going to listen to me, so I've gone to the nations. Oh, that's it. No, we've had enough now. You're off your rocker. They wouldn't accept that they weren't chosen just by birth. So that's the whole thing about the Jews. They think they're entitled by birth. Yahusha himself stated that he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Even Yahusha came along and said, I'm just here. He said that to that woman, I'm not here for you right now. Not here to deal with the dogs right now. And she says, remember, even the dogs can eat the crumbs. Please help me, Master. And he had compassion on her. But even in his mind, he'd come for the lost sheep of Israel in hope that maybe his bride, would receive him. Divorced. Wouldn't have him. Killed him. So that's it. Done. So, those go to the nations. Still to this day have no idea who they are. The Jews. The Jews is just a word that means Judah. There were 12 sons, remember? One of them was Judah. They were the only ones left in the Jerusalem, and they were called, after a while they were called Jews. So Jews, which is Judah, once the royal tribe, not only rejected Yahusha as the promised deliverer and a message that was given to them first, in a last chance attempt to win some of his old bride back. So he still loved his bride, his old bride, but they wouldn't have him. Still wouldn't have him. But they were one of the main sources of hate. Not only did they not accept him, they were one of the main sources of hate and persecution for the early fellowships that Paul and the other followers were planting here in Acts. So today, these people, Jews, Judah, that tribe, today they're called Israel. And they still think that they are these people of the promise. People living over in Israel, one of the biggest, gay capitals, all the metropolis that's going on over there, the sex, money, politics that's going on there. These Israelites think that they are the people of the promise still, today. Those who call themselves Jews have nothing to do with Yahusha's new blood covenant. Israel today has nothing to do with Yahusha's new blood covenant and new bride. And I keep saying new bride and new blood covenant because it's not based on new commands. It's still the commands given to Moses. Nobody can change them. But it's new blood. That's why it's a new covenant. It's new blood. Not new instructions, new blood. That's a very important thing because animal blood couldn't deliver us. But Yahusha's blood can heal us, deliver us from all evil. That's why it's a new blood covenant. And any attempt to force them, the Jews, into future prophecies regarding the return of Yahusha and a millennial reign is all lies and false propaganda. Why? Because they want to lead the true immersed bride back into the old shadow worship that the Jews still promote and which has filtered into her messianic Nazarene daughters, still trying to take us back to the old shadows. So they are blocked, because if you're doing old shadows and rituals and traditions, you're blocked and ensnared in religious protocol, just like the rest of the deluded world. And when you are blocked up and ensnared, you cannot hear and respond to the voice of Yahusha moment to moment, which is the whole plan of the devil. That's why even in this building here, he wants us just to come along, do the same thing every week. Mark will get up and do this, and then we'll do that, and we'll do that, and everybody just does the same thing every week. And then it becomes a new form of liturgy and ritual. And after a while, you realise nobody's listening to Yahusha anymore. But we're all upstanding, brides, so we just come and do our thing. And we pat ourselves on the back and we go home, and it's not fresh anymore, is it? We've got to stay fresh. You've got to stay hearing him. That's the key. Otherwise, we'll just fall into another pattern like everybody else that once had a fresh moment. That's the devil's plan, to stop us from hearing Yahusha moment to moment. So while Scripture does indeed, in the Gospels, in the followers, while they still do use the word Yisrael as a shadow in reference to Yahusha's bride, even in the New Covenant and in last day prophecies, they still use that word. Translators have changed this word, Yisrael, to Israel in most Bibles, to include the divorced Jews back into the equation. They want to bring all the old stuff back in and say, we don't need Yahusha to be part of this. We were born in this. How dare you say we're not included? They're not. They've got to come in the same way as everybody else. But we know that both Yisrael and Israel today have nothing to do with Yahusha's true bride and are just man-made religions based on old lineage and traditions that Judaism and Christianity promote. Because Yisrael is what all the Messianics and Nazarims are saying we have to become. They might have been immersed, but they're pointing us back to the old stuff. And as far as Israel is concerned, they don't even believe in a Messiah. That's a generalisation, but most of them don't. So they've got nothing to do with Yahusha's true bride. Man-made religions. Just like Judaism and Christianity. For indeed they are a big part of Nimrod's beast system of evil worship. That's a big whammy, that. To be an immersed believer in Yahusha and realise that you are still in Nimrod's beast system because you are doing old shadow patterns. And any bridal believer does not flee from such shadow practices is still allowing Satan to breed in their home and fellowship, just as he was in the face of Paul and the early followers through the religious Jews. So, let's make this easy. Let's summarise. Yisrael, divorced. Israel today, not even relevant. Part of the beast system. Part of the world just like every other religion, political system. Yahusha's bride is a global fellowship of immersed believers of any race, colour, Jew, Gentile, doesn't matter, who've had a divine heart operation and are striving to overcome their flesh. That's important because half the bride is going to be foolish. The whole bride's been immersed, but half the bride isn't striving to overcome their flesh by guarding Yahusha's commands, checking their thoughts, offering up daily sacrifices of praise to him, activating the incorruptible seed of eternal life within them, allowing Yahusha to change their behaviour and make them ready for the wedding feast. So that's what the true bride is, people doing that. Getting immersed in Yahusha's name is just the door. The doorway to the narrow path, really. It's just the doorway in. You've got to overcome and start activating that incorruptible seed. Everything Yisrael's bride shadow stood for and was promised through the old covenant relationship is now found in Yahusha's bride through a new and living blood covenant. So I hope that gets rid of any confusion. Anytime you see Yisrael in the scripture, look, Yisrael, look, it says it, that's a shadow of what we are now, his bride. Yahusha wanted them, but they failed. They would not overcome. They would not, and I know they hadn't received the Spirit the same way we have, but they wouldn't even stop worshipping their idols. They couldn't even get to that stage. So Yahusha had a different plan. So we need to be in that battle. We know that picture quite well. Would anybody like to comment on that? Anything you found interesting in there?
around and all the names and stuff for it. So yeah, that was cleared that up a bit for me. I didn't
Yeah.
realise.
Yeah, I was a bit confused too. That's what Christopher and I were talking about last week. To get it straight. Israel, the bride. So if anybody asks, what are you? What are you then? What did you say to them?
Follower of Yahushua,
I'm a Nazarene?
The bride.
The bride. Just the bride. It's easy. Yeah? It's not religious, it's not heavy, it doesn't take an encyclopedia to know what a bride is, does it? It's easy. So that's who we are. And all the promises that were given to people back then through Abraham and Moses, all the promises that were for them are now for us. Because we are the fulfillment. We are the land, we are the temple, we are the portal. We've got everything in us here that they had in all that land back then. So, okay. Would you like to close the meeting for me, Mikey?
Yahushua, we thank you for being with us tonight, and we love you so much, and we want to celebrate with you all the time of how you came back and cleaned the world of their sin, and we want to be with you when you come back, and just keep loving you and praising you forever. So be it.
So be it. Bless everybody and their families this week. We ask you, Yahushua, let your spirit go forth in our prayers and loving our families and helping them and working through them, and give everybody a good week. Draw them closer to you. So be it. That's it, guys.